Etomi. I have joining me live in this studio the Managing Director of Eko Electricity Distribution Company, Engineer Adeoye Fadebiyi, and also a Director at EKEDC, Mr. George Etomi. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on the show.
Thank you, Tolu.
I'm going to start with you. Privatization process and what has happened afterwards. How well have we fared?
Look, Tolu, I'll be clear on one thing. The first thing is that in terms of, is one, to address the one thing that is front and center now in Nigeria, which is the COVID virus. It will be insensitive and also to not address the first thing that is affecting everyone in the country now, which is the coronavirus. So to that extent, I would say that I applaud the Lagos State government for what they're doing and also the federal government in terms of trying to manage this issue or this crisis that we have on our hands. It affects every sector and then also the power sector. So to your question, which is around privatization, I think one, the privatization was a very laudable initiative. It's a direction, it's a global direction, it's a direction in which every sensible system wants to go to, which is to allow for accountability and allow delivery of a very efficient power sector. One of the things I would like to bring to power is that when you look at 2013, November 1st, which signified the handover of these assets, or the beginning of privatization as you would have it, or the implementation of privatization, a number of things were clearly done. I mean, it was to get efficiency in the system, it was to improve on the service delivery, it was to get, quote-unquote, the 24-hour electricity supply. In my view, I mean, as you just said rightly, a few years later, we have a number of concerns. Let's face it very clearly. One is around the generation end, which is the ability or even the capacity, I don't want to say capacity too, but allowing them to be able to deliver on the amount of generation that the country needs. In between there is TCN, where you talk about the wheeling capacity issues that we have. There is some concerns on the ability to be able to wheel this generation. And then on the distribution side, there is clearly challenges without having to continue to beat on the same drum and talking about cost-reflective tariff and everything else, which truly the public does not really understand fully, and maybe they should not be in a situation where they have to understand fully. But the point here is that in the same spirit where you see this COVID, and that's why I started with that, it has forced us to all rally together and stop the blame game. So I'll be very clear with you here, Tolu, as we continue to talk, and I will bring out some points. But the point is the privatization has happened. To try to reverse or turn or change direction, it's a big machine. I think to turn everybody backwards again, I think it's to generally, like what COVID has forced us to do in the health sector, is really, really sit and face our challenges along these three lines and then try to understand what it is that we need to do to try to address all the issues affecting privatization, which we'll talk about.
Let me ask you this question. There's always been one discussion about cost-reflective tariff, which the discos have maintained, talking about reviewing this tariff. What do we really, how do we get this? What do we call a cost-reflective tariff? How do you, to discos, what does this really mean?
Okay, let me start by joining Ade to express my solidarity with the government and people of Nigeria about the challenges we face with the coronavirus thing. And what that is telling every one of us is that we must begin to look for solutions inward. And power is not going to be any different. So 5, 6 years after privatization, we have a model to look at to see where have been hiccups and where we can unknot some of those bottlenecks. One of them is the issue of cost-reflective tariffs. The reason you keep hearing cost-reflective tariffs is that at the point of privatization, it was understood that power was being delivered as a social service. So there was no real emphasis on cost recovery. But when you want to privatize and you're inviting private sector in, they are in there primarily to make a profit and as they supply the service. So one of the things agreed upon was that the artificial pricing of the product, the capping of the price, should be released so that essentially you have market forces. Supply, demand, determine price. Now, the jury is out there. We believe that had we faithfully done that, we would perhaps have gained more from the privatization. But naturally, government is sensitive to the politics of pricing, and so even though they made a commitment to it, the willpower to get it done was never done. So we've skirmished around that issue. But if you ask me, I would say that having privatized You should actually allow the forces of economics to determine. Now, you worry, naturally, for the most vulnerable in the society. Can they afford it? But you cannot, because of them, distort the market, which is what we have today. Because even for the most vulnerable, we all have a way of self-generating. Everybody's having diesel, petrol, generator, blah, blah, blah. And if they look at a holistically, their costs to provide themselves power, it's far higher than if we had had cost-reflective tariffs. So the problem of not having cost-reflective tariffs is that it distorts the market, and everybody who's interested in the value chain are holding back. That includes your bank, includes new investors, it includes your suppliers, everybody. So which is why we've all been saying, just remove that distortion. Now, it was not as if the interest of the masses was not looked into when this was being done. That was recognized, and they said, okay, for a period of time, 2 years, maybe the government should provide a subsidy, 100 billion naira every year, to cushion the effect on the most vulnerable once you allow for cost-reflective tariffs. Unfortunately, none of these things has been allowed to work. Today, we find ourselves where we are still applying arbitrarily low prices, not just at the distribution end, even at the gas end, because 60% of the cost in the value chain is for gas. But gas is artificially priced. Same. So you have at the supply end artificial pricing, at the distribution artificial pricing. So it instantly creates a liquidity crisis. And that's what's putting off many of the people. Otherwise, it's a very attractive, very lucrative industry. But like I said, we're here now with coronavirus. It's got to be homegrown solutions. And part of the reason we came here today was to assure consumers that at least those of the distribution companies in the Lagos area, EKEDC, EKEDC Electric, we've met and we've decided that within the supply that's available to us, we'll make sure that we satisfy the need of many of these consumers. On their own part, they also have a role to play, because one of the biggest threats in the industry is the issue of energy theft. Many of them take it because they feel it's their right. It's been what government, my own share of the national cake, as they do it. We all have a role to play, because electricity still holds the key to the diversification of this economy. And with what you just said about low oil prices, I don't see that we have anywhere else to go but to ensure that we'll take care of that business that will ensure that we win ourselves out of this overdependence on oil. Get our industries cranking again, and get small and medium scale industries working.
It's true, and that's the backbone of any
economy. That is any economy.
See, I'm worried about this blame game at times. I read the newspapers, we go online, and we see the transmission companies saying, oh, we are up to standard, we can wheel out so thousands of megawatts. Discos come out to say, no, this is not happening. When are we going to get to a round table, sit out, and really discuss this and get a way forward?
I think, Tolu, you know me quite well. I mean, I think one of the things you know I will not engage in is a blame game.
Yeah.
I call it blame game, like I've told you many times, a distraction. I think one of the things I like to do is focus.
Great.
Let's be very clear on one thing. Blame games do not progress, do not create progress. It just allows us to keep reversing or moving on really slow pace. When I look at Eko distribution as a start, it's very clear. My obligations are very clear to me, and there's no confusion in terms of what I need to do. I am the customer face for the whole industry, and I should never ever forget. I don't even have there's no opportunity to explain to a customer which part of the supply chain is allowing them not to have electricity. So I think the blame game, yes, it exists. Some you need to respond to because of where it comes from. Some you have the luxury of ignoring. Hopefully you have more that you can ignore than have to address. At EKEDC, I believe that we have probably the most informed customers in the network. This is from my engagement with them. If you look at it with our large network and our customers, EKEDC takes 12 to 15% of the energy supplied from the grid today. That is significant with that many discos. When I have that much electricity, and that alone does not even satisfy 30% of my load demand that I have today. So again, I don't really have enough room for the blame game. So when we talk about issues of supply, we talk about, can I get more electricity? Can I get more than the 15%? But before even the 15%, can we generate more? Those are the kind of conversations we should be having. And for them to generate, do they have enough feedstock? Whether it's gas, whether it's hydro, whatever it is that allows them to generate, we need to look at. Industry agreements we need to look at. Whether from a generation standpoint where they talk about things like gas agreements on the take or pay, ancillary agreements that allow them to do what they need to do, even things like black start. I mean, knowing that, you know, I also have a generation background, I tend to understand a bit of the challenges that they face. But we need to stay and try and understand how I can get more electricity to distribute. I need to ensure that my regulator is strengthened and have the ability. When I say strengthened, they also have challenges, again, blame games where I do not believe that the regulator has been allowed to be fully independent to the extent that they are able to make decisions without having to worry about power being a social amenity or a social utility. Today, we're in essential services mode, where I've spent the last week or last 2 weeks addressing something that is not even electricity, which is COVID. So for example, in the midst of COVID, there's no room for a blame game. Yeah. I'm having to sit almost half of my workforce. I've left and are working remotely from home now. That means that I've put essential or critical staff only. Who are my critical staff? Ensuring that I'm able to supply the electricity, 1. 2, ensuring that the outage time is reduced. 3, the board has been able to approve that I put probably 3-4 months supply of critical spares. These critical spares are so that I can respond to outages that happen. Because guess what? My customers have not left Lagos. My customers have left their companies or their office buildings and they've now moved home, which is now a more sensitive area because now they have all their family members together. The load demand is increased. So I need to figure out how I can reroute or remanage my network so that the energy can go to them from the buildings and the restaurants and the bar and everywhere that's closed. This energy, how does it go to their houses? So again, another room where there's no blame game. Now, if I look at something else where I talk about, when I talk about contracts being ineffective or inefficient, these are industry agreements. As we move forward, again, I think this COVID is going to change the direction of every industry. As we move forward, we're all going to have to sit down and understand how can we generate more energy or more power? How can we distribute? How can we get transmission to have the right willing capacity? How can we address the issue of the underserved and the unserved communities? So when we talk about tariff classes, the regulator has 2 challenges. They're talking about tariff classes along commercial lines, but then the stronger one, or the more effective one, is tariff classes along economic lines. There are people who cannot afford to pay these bills that they receive. So I can understand their agitation. The agitation has nothing to do with the bill that they receive. It has to do with the quantum of the bill and the quantum of their earnings. So when you talk about a subsidy, it's not necessarily a subsidy like petroleum right off the bat, because not everybody uses a car. But everybody uses electricity to That's true. So that's really where we are.
A big one. No, Mr. George, let's talk about metering, please, because television time is always running. Tell us about metering. We know of the taking it away from the discos and the MAP scheme. How well are we doing with this? People are still complaining of not having meters.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we had, if you remember, something called CAPME, the Credited Advanced Payment Metering implementation, which at that time still left metering squarely as a responsibility of the discos, but then encouraged consumers who could afford it to pay for the meters, and then over a period it is netted off their invoices. And that for me appeared to be working, but for some reason the regulator felt it wasn't working, and then decided to introduce the meter asset provider, which are third-party meter asset providers, and then they interface with the discos. So what we do, we give them our customer numbers, ask them to go and meter. But the first problem the meter asset providers had was this issue of getting bank loans because of all the sound bites that are coming out of the industry. Banks and lenders are reluctant to lend. And then there was also this mismatch between protecting local meter manufacturers and those who are also importing, because the amount of meters you need cannot be met locally. And then midstream, as they shipped their meters, they got to the ports, the tariff, the tax changed from 10% to 45%. So many of them just basically abandoned it. So where we are today with the third-party meter asset providers is that they are not meeting the demands. And don't forget their own methodology too is that supply the meter and over a period of time, but that's not happening. So they are giving priority to those who can say, look, I want to give me my meter. They would go because it helps them with their cash flow. But going forward, like Ade said, we're not just here to highlight problems. We are talking to the government, to the regulator, and now to the meter asset providers, and asking them to roll out meters. Because metering is the trust line between consumers and the distribution companies. And with this vexed issue of estimated billings, we don't want to hear too much about it. The metering gap is still very wide.
Very wide.
Largely because statistics are not available. When we took over, they gave us the impression it was like 4 million unmetered Nigerians. But when we took over, we found it was nearer 10 million. But I advise that as opposed to the plan to meter everybody before you adjust tariffs, if you do that, it's going to stagnate the industry. There is always an internationally accepted estimated billing methodology. That should be strictly enforced. Do your meter rollout and find a middle ground, because we must get to that point where we stop ourselves from growing and all that. We will just do that. For example, most of our, what they call the MD, maximum demand, we're almost 100%, almost 100% metered, and they provide clearly about 60%, 65% of our revenue. Wow. So it is the households we're all after. And as I speak to you, the meter rollout is going. We can agree to some kind of ceiling, but not what the regulator just brought out. That is not going to work. So we should look, and let me be honest with you, we do a lot of engagement with our consumer groups. And that has been so revealing. And many consumers are actually sympathetic. They are, yes, very upset about estimated bills, but they begin to see the problems many discos are facing. So we've decided, look, let's engage them more directly. And we can agree with you, because there is always a billing pattern, a consumption pattern that will merge. If we allow you, which we're now doing Eko Disco, you complain about the bill, we say, okay, don't worry, let him consume for 3-4 months. A consumption pattern will emerge. We then say, okay, that should be your estimated billing. He's happy, we're happy. And then it's in our interest to ensure we quickly roll out a meter to him. Let me say one thing clear. There is no guarantee that if you get a meter, you pay more, you pay less. That's one thing.
Depends on what you consume.
It depends on what you consume.
We're going to round this off very, very shortly now. Tell us, what should your customers expect more from you at this very challenging time?
Thank you. I think I would try to be very specific, since you want to round up very shortly. I would say one thing, since I have the platform to talk to the general public. There are two types of customers that need to get metered. So I'll start from the meter. One is the customer that uses 10,000 naira worth of electricity, but they really consume 5,000 naira. One is a customer that gets a bill for 10,000 naira of electricity, but they consume 40,000 naira. What we're seeing is the pattern that he described, where we're seeing customers not coming. The customers that know that they're underpaying do not want to be metered. And in some cases where they get metered, they do bypass or we get theft. To be very clear to the public, we have 36,880 applications received so far from Eko Disco for meters, of which we have those have all been sent to the maps, of which about half of that payment has been made, and about 11,000 meters have been installed. Now, we're ramping up. The commitment that I have here is that we've been ramping up, after removing all the constraints, we've been ramping up the meter installation out there. What I ask for is that customers that are also rejecting or not wanting these meters, they need to really get on board, and we need to meter them. There are NEC regulations that allow us to disconnect them if they don't take a meter. Because again, the idea is that everybody should be metered, and that's what we're working towards. Secondly, in terms of supply, which is what I think my customers need today, I'm committed with the rest of my team, and I think I give kudos to my team out there that we've put as called essential services, those that are critical to ensuring that my customers have supply. The idea is to ensure that all the power that we get, Eko will not do any kind of load shedding as far as the supply that we get from the grid. What we will do is spend a lot of time trying to redirect and ensure that we put the power out there. So in terms of that, any other thing that I need to put together, and then customer care and communication. We've put our teams 24-hour support. All our teams are now working remotely in our customer care department. There's no physical engagement anymore at any of our customer care. We've been publishing a lot of all the different lines that we have. So at the end of the day, Tolu, my job is clear, simple but hard. Is to ensure that people get supply as much as they can.
Yes.
Can I just add
quickly, very quickly. 1 minute.
Two things I want to address. First, my heart out to our essential services people who will be out there and asking the public, please understand that these guys are putting the risk of their health and everything. They are out there. As a company, we're supporting them. They'll be out there. Please don't molest them. Support them like everybody else should. And then on the issue of supplies, as I told you, let's not worry too much. We're looking at this premium power thing, like similar to what EKEDC is doing with Magodo, where we're getting consumer groups to come together and say, look, because it's now our problem, leave the government out of it and everything. We get a band of consumers. We are transparent with them because we are metered to get the power we get. So we tell them, this is so much coming to you. Are you willing to pay X price? And many of them are responding. That way, we will eliminate this.
I must thank you, Mr. John Etomi, the Director, Eko Electricity Distribution Company, and the Chief Executive Officer, Engineer Adeoye Fadebiyi. Thank you very much for your time coming to talk to us on business.